In this class, in the previous class, we have just studied about the Vedic literature. So, to understand the Vedic culture, we need so Vedic culture needs certain sources. So, among the sources, the literary sources are very important. And among the literary sources, we were studying about first in the beginning class we studied about the Vedas, right? So like Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda and all. So another category of Vedic literature was Brahmanas. So these were written after the Vedas as their simple commentaries. So for Vedas, certain sages have written commentaries. Understood? So that means the comments written by sages for the Vedas are known as Brahmanas. So the Brahmanas are in prose. That means like they are like theory, and they explain. So what does these Brahmanas exactly has? They have social and religious importance of the rituals as well as the value of sacrifices. So the sages who do yajnas like this, which is a ritual. So conducting a yajna like this is a ritual. So for this particular ritual, there will be an importance in society, that is social importance and religious importance. So in terms of religion also, there will be some importance for that particular ritual. So these Brahmanas will explain in the form of theory about the importance of sociological and the religious importance of these rituals as well as the sacrifices they offer. So during the performance of yajnas, the sages also perform certain sacrifices. So need not be animal sacrifices here. It may be, in terms of whatever the ghee whatever they add into that yajna and all, no, it may come under also sacrifice. So the commentaries of Vedas are called Brahmanas, and they describe about the social and religious importance of the ritual conducted and the sacrifices made. So they are of very great historical value. Each Veda has several Brahmanas. So you take Rig Veda, you take Atharvana Veda, Samaveda. Every Veda had been read, and the sages have written their own comments on that Veda. So there are several Brahmanas. So those commentaries are called Brahmanas, we said. So these Brahmanas are many for different Vedas. So the other kind of literature. So in Vedic literature, first one is Vedas, second one is their commentary is called Brahmanas. The third category is Aranyakas. So they are known as forest books. So the word Aranya itself reveals that they are something related to forest. So written for the guidance of the hermits and the students living in forest. So what are these Aranyakas? So you can call them like forest books. So why they're called forest books? Because see, so these Aranyakas will be a guiding books. So they are like guiding books for whom the hermits. So hermits is nothing but again sages and all who live, in a very alone life in forests, and they dedicate themselves in the teaching and other teaching of all the Vedic literature and all such things. So how these sages should live and how their students should live in the forest while learning this Vedic literature. All such guidelines were given in book called Aranyakas. So basically these Aranyakas are guidelines or the books with guidelines for the hermits and their students. Here hermits means the sages who live solitude life. That means they leave all the worldly affairs and now they go to these forest areas, spend their time in you know tapasya and all, and also they educate the students whoever come to them. So for all them, they need certain guidelines. That books are called forest books, and they form the concluding part of the Brahmanas. So their main themes are mysticism and philosophy. So here, these Aranyakas are the concluding part of Brahmanas. What do you mean by concluding part of Brahmanas? Brahmanas are the comments. So now these Aranyakas will conclude the commentary portion on Vedas. So once with this Aranyakas, the commentary portion which starts with Brahmanas will end. So these Aranyakas also describe about the mysticism. So what do you mean by mysticism here? Some divine things, some magical things. So something which is not, which we cannot believe, such certain mystical things. Here it believe in the sense, so which only the sages and all can perform. So such mysticism and philosophy, so all such things can be discussed in this Aranyakas, which are also called forest books. So then comes the other important Vedic literature called Upanishads. So, so what are Upanishads? These are the philosophical commentaries on the Vedas. So the doctrines such as karma, moksha, and maya are explained in detail. So see, there is a difference between Brahmanas and Upanishads. So Upanishads, so if you look at these Upanishads, so they are different from Brahmanas because these Upanishads are philosophical commentaries. Okay, so whereas Brahmanas, they're just the comments written by sages, but here philosophical commentaries means something new they understand from the Vedic, or the Vedas. Here, whatever has been written in Veda in Brahmanas, that simply they try to comment on that how it is. But the Upanishads, what they will do is the sages who read Vedas, they will try to understand that particular Veda in a different way. They'll try to interpret that Veda and they frame their own philosophical comment. So here, that philosophical comments made by sages on Vedas are called Upanishads. So in Sanskrit, Upa and Nishad means sitting near. So by Upa means by and Nishad means near. So here, sitting near to teacher and learning the philosophical commentaries on Vedas is called Upanishads. So these Upanishads are the philosophical commentaries of Vedas. So in this philosophical commentary, you can learn about some very big intellectual topics or philosophical topics like karma, which means the action, the moksha, which means the salvation, and maya, which means which cannot be understood. That means which cannot we cannot understand through normal senses. So with all these three things were explained very detailed in Upanishads. So these Upanishads form the basic source of Indian philosophy. So here, the first time the word philosophy can be understood in a very fundamental manner. So you can conclude that from here onwards, Indian philosophy was developing or was developed. So these were composed by different sages. They are said to form the foundation on which later additions to Vedic literature rest. So the Vedic literature, as you know, it consists of Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, even Upanishads. So especially these Upanishads, because of these Upanishads only, or because of these commentaries only, later certain additions were done to the entire literature, to the entire Vedic literature, that we will see what are there. So the most famous of these additions or Upanishads were Chandogya Upanishad, Keno Upanishad. Keno means like, who are you? This kind of who am I? This kind of concept. Aitreya Upanishad and Tatriya Upanishad. So there are some more Upanishads called Katha Upanishad where completely the sages will be telling to the students in the form of stories. All the Vedic literature is explained in the form of stories. So this is about Upanishads. So thing you have to remember is these are philosophical commentaries. They include karma, moksha, and maya, and there are different kinds of Upanishad. So sorry, they serve as a basic source of Indian philosophy. Also, there are many types of Upanishads like Chandogya Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Aitareya Upanishad, and Tatriya Upanishad. So there is no necessity for you to learn in depth what these Upanishads, Chandogya, Aitareya, what they deal and all. Just remember those names. That is more than enough. So there are other Vedic literature called Allied Vedic literature. So what do you mean by Allied Vedic literature? So they are like related. So they are related to Vedas, but similarly they are not completely Vedas. Okay, they are just a part of Vedas, but they are they can be called as allied Vedic literature. They're part of. So here let us see what are those allied Vedic literature. So first one is the Vedangas. So they deal with the ways in which the Vedas are to be chanted. So how there will be a lot of mantras and there will be a lot of the poetry and all many things will be written in the Vedas. How the mantras have to be chanted and how they have to be pronounced, all such things. So these Vedangas are basically they deal with how the Vedas have to be chanted. So with what pitch they have to chant, how much, what is the tune that they have to take for that. So many such things are described here. And they are also important in understanding of the Vedas. So the way you chant, the way where you have to give stress, the way where you have to apply high stress in pronouncing this Vedic chants, that all we learn so that it gives us more understanding about the Vedas. So that's the Vedangas. Angas means here the parts. So they can be called as parts of Vedas because we are just pronouncing how they have to be chanted. So there are almost six Vedangas. So there are six Vedangas. They deal with pronunciation. As I said, how the letters are, how the Sanskrit words have to be chanted, where they have to be stressed, and all such things come under pronunciation. So so the Vedangas are divided into many categories. Some of the Vedangas deals with pronunciation of the chants, and some Vedangas deals with the grammar. That means how the letters have been written and all, and some Vedangas have been described about the etymology. So etymology means like finding the root meaning of that word. Suppose there is a word in Veda, suppose Rig Veda, in that there is a particular word. What is the root meaning of that word? So that is also described. You can call it like a dictionary here. So the root meaning of that particular word can be learned through this Vedanga, one kind of Vedanga where the meanings can be known. So metrics, so where even about measurement of things, so that is also described in particular Vedanga. And astronomy, you know about astronomy, that almost like the space and the stars and many other things were also. So in Vedangas there is a description of many such things. So even astronomy was one such thing. So among the six Vedangas, one deals with pronunciation, another with grammar, etymology, metrics, and astronomy. So then comes the sutras. So you can call these sutras as principles in English. So they are divided into three groups. So the sutras are divided into three groups. One is Srauta Sutras, which deal with yajna and sacrifices. So there are some principles which you have to follow before conducting a yajna. So that principles are called Srauta Sutras, and the Griha Sutras are Smarta Sutras, which deal with the ceremonies connected with family life. So here, Yajna Sutras, Srauta Sutras deal with the principles on which an yajna has to be conducted, and Grihya Sutras or Smarta Sutras, they describe about the family life. So how the ceremonies in a you might be understanding in a family, if you take your own families also, you will be performing several rituals in your home. Ceremonies will be conducted, your elders and your ancestors ceremony and all will be conducted, right? So they're all your ceremonies. So being a family man, what kind of ceremonies they have to conduct, all such information and on which principles it has to be conducted, that is given in Grihya Sutras and the Dharma Sutras, which provides rules of conduct for various classes of people. So rules of conduct, that means in those days, during this Vedic days, society was divided into different classes based on the work they do. So each class of people or each section of people, they have to follow certain conduct. That means they have to follow certain behavior rules. So those rules or the principles were described in these Dharma Sutras. So for various classes, there are different Dharma Sutras and various stages also in their life. So as per the Vedic philosophy and Vedic way of living, life is also categorized into many, what do you call, it was also categorized into many types. Even that life, how they have to lead, how they have to conduct, that sutras or that principles were also explained in Dharma Sutras. So Yajna Sutras, sorry, Shrauta Sutras with Yajna, Grihya Sutras for the ceremonies in family, and Dharma Sutras for conduct or behavior of various classes in society, as well as principles were there for various stages of life of man. So all such principles were included in Dharma Sutras. Then comes the Upavedas. As the name suggests, they are subsidiary Vedas. So they are subsidiary. What do you mean by subsidiary? So you can refer these Upavedas as supplementary. Okay, they are very much related to Vedas, but they are just supplementary Vedas. So they are four in number. How many Upavedas are there? Four in number. Ayurveda deals with the Indian system of medicine. So Ayurveda is one Upaveda which deals with medicines. I mean the medicinal aspect of human beings. The Dhanurveda describes the art of warfare. So how a war is to be done. I know like what is the kind of principle they have to follow. All such things were described in Dhanurveda. And Gandharva Veda describe the art of music, and Shilpa Veda deals with art and architecture. So we have Ayurveda, Dhanurveda warfare, Gandharva Veda art and music, Shilpa Veda deals with art and architecture. So these are the Upavedas. Then comes the Darshanas. So another kind of allied Vedic literature was Darshanas. Remember all these Vedic, early Vedic, whatever we talked till now, they are just associated to the Vedas. But because of their slight differences, they were just kept like a associated with Vedic literature. There are six schools of Indian philosophy known as Shad Darshanas. So here Darshana you can refer like Darshanik we call it in Sanskrit. No, that means one who has a good thinking capacity and one who has a good knowledge. And with his thinking capacity, he can just frame things. So that generally a philosopher does. So these darshanas are nothing but philosophical schools. So there are six schools of philosophy, Indian philosophy known as Shad Darshanas. Shad means six. They include Nyaya Darshana. You can just think philosophically how they have laid foundations for the Nyaya Shastra, or which is called the justice system, and Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga Shastra, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa. So they all propagate the virtues of life and are opposed to external rituals. See, these philosophical things are very much close to, so these darshanas or philosophy, they describe about various things. They include like Nyaya Darshana, they describe about the justice and other principles. So Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa. So here Mimamsa means reflection on that particular topic. Suppose you take Yoga Mimamsa, that means it describes about the yogic life and also how the asanas and other things will be done. So all such things will be explained in this kind of philosophical thing. And you take Vaisheshika, so where it describes about the logical aspects of Vedas, and you take Purva Mimamsa, it describes about like similar to how they understand Vedas basically, that is understood philosophically. What kind of philosophical things they have understood, that comes as darshanas. Suppose if somebody has read particular Veda and they have got some kind of logic out of it. then they can understand it as, you can call it like Vaisheshika Mimamsa. So that particular category is kept in one darshana. So the Vedas, which gives us all the information about logics and all such things, they all get together studied under Vaisheshika Mimamsa. So these are the kind of darshanas we have. And then comes the other elite Vedic literature called Dharma Shastras. The law books called Dharma Sutras and the Smritis, together with their commentaries, are called, okay. So these Dharma Shastras are, they are called law books. So the books which deals with the law and other kind of principles. So here these the law books were called Dharma Sutras. Okay. And the Smritis, together with their commentaries. That means the law books. So here the law books are called Dharma Sutras, and the Smritis, together with these commentaries, are called Dharma Shastras. So what is, so here generally the law books are called as Dharma Sutras. So here they completely describe about the principles of the law. But Smritis, so where did you heard this word Smriti? In the beginning you heard that Shruti and Smriti. So Shruti was the knowledge transferred by God to the sages. Smriti was the composition of sages directly. By having a basic understanding on Shruti, sages have composed their own literature. That was called Smriti. So the Smritis, together with their commentaries, are called Dharma Shastras. So the Smritis, together with their commentaries, are called Dharma Shastras here. So what does these Dharma Shastras include? So here there is a mistake here. I can't include the page, but I'll explain here. What are these Dharma Shastras? They laid down the duties of classes of people in society. So in society those days, people were divided into different classes, and all classes of people had different jobs to do. So their duties were being given in this Dharma Shastras. So for example, you take Manusmriti. So it gives the Hindu code of law, including the Varnas and the Ashramas. So Manusmriti was one such Dharma Shastra where it is where we'll get information about the Hindu code of law. That means how a Hindu has to lead his life, and also in that Hindu code of law, how every caste has to perform its duty, and how every stage of human being has to be led. So all such information has been given in this Dharma Shastras. Also, we have Ashtadhyayi as an another Vedic, allied Vedic literature. So it was called Ashtadhyayi. So what is this? It is a it describes about the grammar in Sanskrit. Okay, so Ashtadhyayi, it is another well early Vedic literature which describes about the grammar in Vedic literature, and it gives about the roots of the words and the context in which they were used. So which we have studied like here in pronunciation, right? Vedangas. So similar to that, these Ashtadhyayis, which was composed by Panini, a great Sanskrit scholar. So in that Ashtadhyayis, Panini has completely described about how what are the root words of the meanings. You can call it like a dictionary. So Ashtadhyayi can become like a grammar dictionary. So that was about the allied Vedic literature. So after this, we had a lot of information about the epics. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which I don't think I need to explain again. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata story you know very well. So I just skipped that story of Ramayana and Mahabharata. Let us see what is the importance of those epics. That Ramayana Mahabharata, you can even just if you read, can understand. No need to explain the story again. So I just skipped this topic. So I'm just explaining the importance of epics. So the epics serve as the main source of information on the political institutions and the social and cultural organization of epic age. So they serve as source of information on political institutions. That means how the society was ruled, how was the king system, administration, whether the kings were the rulers or who were the rulers, isn't it? If you read Ramayana, we read about Ayodhya, the kings, his administration, the Rama Rajya we call, all such political institution. So the society will come to know how people were culturally living in those age. All such information can be known. That is one importance. They provide information on various Aryan kingdoms, their armies and weapons. So they used. So how Aryans lived in different kingdoms. We had different kingdoms during those days. You take for example, this you take in Mahabharata, you take Pandavas, Kuru and Kuru, the others. No, see these kind of tribal way. I mean, they're not tribals, but they were living with the different kingdoms. So the Kuru kingdom, the Pandavas, I know these all things will come to know. Oh, these are the people who are living with a particular kingdom. How their armies were there, what kind of military strength they has, what kind of weapons they have used. All such information can be known through these epics. The Kshatriyas were interested in the defense of their kingdoms. So one important information that we came to know is about Kshatriya class. This is a class of people who will rule. They are generally the ruling class. And how they are interested in the defense of kingdom. That means how they used to defend their kingdom, and they believed that the death on battlefield was the noblest act in the life of warrior. So Kshatriyas class, how they live and how they try to protect their kingdoms, that information we'll know. Also we know that how they look that profession as very sacred. The Kshatriyas feel that defending and even death in that defending their kingdom as a very sacred and holy thing. So that information, that kind of cultural thing also we can know. The epics are considered as the finest literary works of the ancient period and are acclaimed for their literary and philosophical value. So the way the epics have been, written, I know the way they gave us information, I know it is extraordinary. So literature wise, it provides a very great information. Those days, you can call them like in such very beginning days of our culture, how the literature was developing is also an important aspect which these epics will teach us, and how much philosophical value that even today we have, that is also explained, or that also comes under the importance. They reveal the high ideals of family life of Aryans. So as you know that family was also the basic structural unit in those Aryan or the days, how family was living and what are the ideals of the family, that information is also known through the epics. So in those, continuing with our the importance of epics, there are some great heroes mentioned in these epics, right? The Rama, if you take Mahabharata, the Krishna. So these are depict the great people who were playing a prominent role in these epics called Ramayana, Mahabharatas. They reflect us the high moral principles and made a great impact on successive generation. So these people who are the greatest hero with their greatest heroic acts in what you call the epics, they gave us certain high moral principles. If you take Rama, so they call Rama Raja, how great a king can rule, his kingdom. That reflection from Rama comes, and how he treats his people. That is also a great reflection of the character of king. You take Krishna, how intelligent he is. Without any weapon, he just conducted. How the intelligence of the person there. Many such high good principles and many impacts will be learnt from these epics. And the Bhagavad Gita elaborates the karma philosophy and the immorality of the soul. So, Bhagavad Gita, which is a very great output of the Mahabharata epic, which was said to be given by Lord Krishna. So, here it gives us the great concepts of karma. So, no other philosophical book in the world has such a great interpretation about the actions of people, which is called the karma. Such a great interpretation and philosophical thing has been given in this Bhagavad Gita, and also the immorality of the soul. That means only the body dies, not the soul. So this kind of concepts were all very important, which we learn even today and which we even believe even today. So these are all the greatest concepts which gives us about the importance of epics. So coming to the early settlements. So this we said that these people are Aryans, right? So these Aryans, where are they? Who are these people? How they came? And how is there any mention about them? That all things we'll study now. So on the basis of the names of the rivers and mountains mentioned in the Rig Veda, it is believed that Aryans entered India from Afghanistan and settled in the valley of Kabul River and the Punjab. So we know that the Aryans have come initially and they are responsible for the Vedic age and all. And but where are these people from where these people came and where initially they settled, that we will see now. So there is a mention of Aryans in Rig Veda. So Rig Veda, you know that it is the ancient most Veda or Vedic text which is available to tell us about more about the Vedic societies and Vedic civilization. So as per Rig Veda, there is a mention of some rivers. Okay, in Rig Veda there is some mention of rivers and mountains also. So in Sanskrit language, they mention some river names and mountain names. So according to the mention of these river names and mountain names, the scholars understood that Aryans entered from India through Afghanistan. Okay, Afghanistan, which is a very close bordering country next to Pakistan, we have this Afghanistan and also from Afghanistan people, these Aryans have entered into India. So if you just take India map here, so what happens is through this Afghanistan people have entered here. So you get border here, Afghanistan and all. So through Afghanistan, they have entered into India, and so you take Kabul River here. So they settled along the banks of the Kabul River. They're from Central Asia actually. So they came from Central Asia to Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan they entered into India. There is a mention of Kabul River in the Rig Veda, and also you can call it the Hindu Kush mountains, which are very close here. That is a mention of things in Rig Veda. So in the valley of Kabul River and the Punjab. So they called this northwestern part of India Sapta Sindhu, or the land of seven rivers. So the Aryans, okay, who settled here, who initially settled, who came and settled here in the Punjab region, they called this northwestern portion. So this is the north and west part of India. This northwestern part of India was referred as Sapta Sindhu region. Sapta means seven. Sindhu means the river name. So, or the land of seven rivers. So we all know that the Sindhu River or Indus River is having seven tributaries. One is Ravi, Bias, Satluj, Jhelum, Chenab, and Saraswati. So these are the seven tributaries of river Sindhu. There is a mention of about Sindhu River with its seven tributaries in Rig Veda, which shows that Aryans know which reflects that Aryans had their early settlements in this Sapta Sindhu region or this Sindhu River region. So this region covers the present areas of eastern Afghanistan, Punjab, and parts of western Uttar Pradesh. So because these tributary rivers, they don't flow in one way. So if you take seven tributaries, they may flow in different directions. So even up to western Uttar Pradesh, these tributaries of the rivers have been extended. So some of this portion lies in eastern Afghanistan, some lies in the Punjab region and parts of western Uttar Pradesh. So this western Uttar Pradesh region and all also covers under this region. Later, this region was named as Brahmavarta, or the land of gods. So the Sapta Sindhu region, the river of the land of seven rivers, was referred by Aryans as Brahmavarta. Brahmavarta means land of gods, because the composition of Rigveda took place here on the banks of river Saraswati, which they considered most sacred. So if you take the tributaries, Saraswati flows here, and which is a tributary of Indus River, and on the banks of the river Saraswati, which is a tributary of river Indus, on its banks, the Aryans composed Rig Veda, which is our ancient most text in the world. So this is the ancient most text available till now, and this Rig Veda has been composed on the banks of Saraswati River. They named it the river also as Saraswati because it is like something related to educational, you know, knowledge. So regarding knowledge, it's a very sacred river for them. On the banks of this river only Rig Veda was composed. And this region provided conditions for stable agriculture. As Saptasindhu region is very, with good water facility, it is always a perennial river, so water is always present in that river. So people settled well here for as their agriculture practice also went well. So as agriculture can be done well, as plenty of water is available, the place became very much suitable for living. And the act of moving from one place to place with herds of animals ceased to have the preeminence it had enjoyed in early days. This fact too was responsible for the evolution of a new culture. So here, these Central Asian tribals called Aryans, they had the habit of moving from one place to another place. But once they come across this Sindhu River region, they no longer need to migrate or lead a nomadic life. They have settled. So they stopped moving with their animals and all from one place to another place, and they have settled. They have ceased to have the preeminence it had enjoyed in earlier days. That means in early days they had this habit of moving from one place to another place in search of food and water. But now Saptasindhu region is with plenty of water and agriculture can be done in a very nice way. So they have settled in this region and it responsible for evolution of new culture. As people settled here, they gave rise to new culture. So now let us see how was the society of these Aryans in the Sapta Sindhu region or during the when they composed the Rig Veda. So there is a mention in Rig Veda in the Rigvedic time or early Vedic period. So the period during which the Aryans have settled in Sapta Sindhu region is called early Vedic period. So it is during this early Vedic period Rig Veda was composed. So it is also called Rig Vedic time. So Aryans initially lived in villages. So it was not an urban society. It was like mostly village kind of living. So the family was the fundamental unit of society. So in the beginning days of their life, Aryans have settled in the kind of village atmosphere and village lifestyle was there. And the family was fundamental unit of society. So if you take the society, there were number of families and it was patriarchal families. What do you mean by patriarchal families? That means the oldest male member of the family was its head. So oldest male means generally the grandfathers and all, or if they are not there, the father, they will be head of the family. So in any society where the oldest member of the family is head of the family, then such societies are called patriarchal societies and he was called as Grihapati or Kulapati. So the oldest male member or the head of the family was referred as Grihapati or Kulapati. After the death of Grihapati, the responsibility shifted to his eldest son. So only males were having, so you can understand that the society was male dominated here because the oldest male will be given the authority to be the head of the family and once that man dies, the next eldest member in the male member in the family becomes Gruhapati. So this was hereditary in family. So that authority is being shifted to the next eldest member. Once the eldest member dies, next eldest member, male member, will become the head of the family. So the society is called patriarchal society. Several families lived in grama or village. So As I said, they lived a village lifestyle. The villages were called gramas. Okay, so early Aryans lived in gramas. So these villages, they together formed Visha. Okay, so several villages together were referred as Visha, and many Vishas together formed Janas. So Grama into Visha, Gramas together called Vishas, and the Vishas together formed Jana, and the head of the village was called Gramani. So what is he called? Gramani. So Grama is village, Gramani is head of the village, and that of Visha, it will be Vishapati. So several villages, suppose there is one village. So each village was having Gramani. Now, several such villages, suppose you take some 5 villages are present together in that area are present. These 5 villages were together called Visha. And for all these 5 villages, there will be a head called Vishapati. And such several villages, suppose this is one group of villages, this is another group of, suppose in these 5 villages are there, here another 5 villages as group as there, and here these are another 5 villages. Total no, all such groups was called as, this is each one is called Visha, right? Each group of villages is called Visha, and all such Vishas are together called Jana. And for this Jana, we have Rajan as head. Okay. For Grama, there is Gramani. For Visha, there is Vishapati. And for the Jana, we have Rajan. So Jana is nothing but group of Vishas. The kings governed with the help of ministers. So Rajan is nothing but the king. So the king was not alone in governing his people. He was assisted by ministers. Understood? And the important offices include Gramani, Purohita, and Senani. So Gramani, you know who is Gramani. So and for the king, Gramani is very important because at the root level, he was the headman, and the Purohita, who is nothing but the priest. So always the kings give more importance to the priest, and the Senani, that means the commander of armed forces. So here the Senani was the commander of army, the Purohita performed the religious ceremonies. So the administration of villages was carried out by Gramani. So here the king, who was head of the Jana, was assisted by ministers. Along with ministers, the Gramani was very important for king's administration because at the root level it is the Gramani who monitors a village, and Purohita will be very important in king's governance because he conducts all the rituals, religious affairs, all such things. And Senani, the commander of armed forces in defending their kingdom, is also very important. So the administration of villages was carried out by Gramani. This we have studied already. The king did not maintain any regular army. However, in times of war, he used to organize tribal groups to perform military functions. As I said, there are a lot of villages in it. In each village, a group of families will form a tribal group, and all they're under one headman. So whenever the king requires, these tribal groups provide some kind of armies. They don't maintain a regular army. So there will be some standing army for the king, but if at all a war comes with another kingdom or another Jana, then the king will ask all the other tribal families or groups at from village level to provide some armies. So the armies comes from different groups there. During the Rigvedic time, the tribe elected a leader of its own. So a group of families which is having common belief systems is called a tribe. So each tribe had its own head or leader. He was not as powerful as one in the later Vedic period. So the concept of kings and all arose slowly in later Vedic period. But in early Vedic period, they were still living with a lifestyle of tribal lifestyle. So the tribal head, if you compare with the later Vedic kings, the tribal head is not that powerful. You take later Vedic kings, You take Rama and all, they were all later Vedic kings. So they were so powerful. There are many great Kshatriya kings. So they are all very powerful. But the early Vedic tribal heads or the kings, but they were not that powerful when you compare with the kings of later Vedic period. So in the Rigvedic period, three popular assemblies known as Sabha, Samiti, and Vidhata advised the king. So you can understand how modernized they were living. Even today we live with certain kind of assemblies and all. So the king, during the Rigvedic period, there were some assemblies, popular assemblies called Sabha, Samiti, and Vidhata. So what is their role? Their role is to advise the king. Vidhata was the earliest assembly used to perform all kinds of functions like economic, military, religious, and social. So Vidhata was an assembly which performs economic functions for the king, which advises the king on economic affairs, military affairs, as well as religious and social affairs. It is called an all-in-one advisory body to king. Women actively participated in the deliberations in the Vidhata. So even women were allowed as members in this Vidhata uh, kind of assembly. So even women were part of this. You can understand how important, how much importance people were giving in those days to women. Samiti was the assembly of people and Sabha was the council of elders. So later on, Vidhata kind of assembly was outdated and in their place, Sabha and Samiti got into popular. So what is Samiti and what is Sabha? Suppose you take a village. Samiti was the assembly of the people. That means in Samiti, all the members of the village will be members. And if you take Sabha, okay, in that particular village, what is Sabha means? It is council of elders. Whoever is eldermost people in that particular village, they all will together form a council called Sabha. So the Sabha performed advisory and judicial functions. So what was the duty of Sabha? Advise and also judicial function. That means if anybody does mistakes, a crime in that particular village, or you take the king, you take the king also. So as we are talking about king, so for the king, the Sabha will be advising and even it does some judicial functions. Samiti was called to session on special occasion. So whenever the king feels that he wants to involve all the people and he has to take a decision, then he calls for a Samiti meeting. So where all the people of that kingdom will assemble, or if you take a particular village, all the people of that village will assemble and they'll take the decision as per their head. In the later Vedic age, kingship became hereditary and divine elements came to be associated with the king. So initially, it was people who were electing their heads in the early Vedic times. But in later Vedic times, the kingship has become hereditary. What do you mean by hereditary here? That means the king later, if he dies, next his son will become the next king. It's not people who elect them, it is hereditary. By birth itself, they'll get a chance to be the next kings. This period marked the beginning of taxation system and administrative machinery. So slowly, a very advanced living style came up. Taxes were being levied on people, and also administrative wise, there were many changes. During the later Vedic age, the popular assemblies lost their earlier importance. Sabha and Samiti came to be dominated by chiefs and rich nobles. So here, in Rigvedic times, Sabha and Samiti dominated, but in later Vedic age, Sabha and Samiti lost their importance and they were dominated by the chiefs and the rich nobles. That means the ministers of the king. They dominated the what do you call the kingdom. Women were no longer permitted to attend these assemblies, whereas in Rigvedic times, women were actively given participation for Vidhata assembly, whereas by later age, women were not allowed to participate in these assemblies. So what was the position of women? During Rigvedic period, women were respected and institution of marriage had become sacred. The daughters were given freedom to choose their husband. So here what happened in Rigvedic times, what was the position of women? The position of women was very good and strong. So daughters were arranged swayamvaras and all so that they can choose their husbands. That kind of liberty was given to women. A lot of importance is given. So later, remarriage of widows was prevalent. In Rigvedic times, even remarriages were done for widows. There are no examples of child marriages in Rigvedic times. So you can see how society was very moral and how rational it was. The marriageable age in Rigveda seems to have been 16 to 17. So such a high standard principles were followed in Rigvedic times. Women, especially with reference to women, they were given high respect. Remarriages of widows was done. Even they were allowed to their assemblies to participate. They were given a chance to select their husbands. Many such privileges were there for women in Rigvedic times. In later Vedic period, there was a significant decline in the status of women. So the position of women was completely declined in later Vedic period. In yajnas, they were not allowed. They did not enjoy the right to property. So no property rights were given for women, and the freedom to choose husband by women was curtailed. That means very limited, and it was almost restricted. So you can say that the position of women drastically fallen during later Vedic period.